Welcome to today's podcast episode of The Trust Doctor, restoring trust and enriching significant relationships. And are you in for an incredible treat today? Hang on for a minute, because I know you're going to love this interview so much. You can even go ahead right now, like, comment, share, and subscribe to this podcast. So to say that today's guest is a visionary and a thought leader is an absolute understatement. I'm not going to read his bio to you because then you'll probably know who he is, but he is right up there with the best of the best from Silicon Valley. You name them, Jeff Bezos, all of them. He's right up there with them. And today you are going to hear from him and get his pearls of wisdom. So put on your seatbelts, because Marc Randolph is about to take us for a ride. Welcome, Marc.
Oh, thank you. That was quite the intro. And I got to say, I like the peremptory close. In other words, you get people to subscribe and like before they hear what the podcast is, just in case I flub this thing horrendously.
Well, first of all, I would bet the farm that's not going to happen. And I don't bet. But even if they don't like it, they'll forget to unsubscribe. So they'll subscribe right ahead. So let me set you up a little bit even better. So Marc is the co-founder and the former CEO of Netflix. But I don't want to start with that, right? Because Marc is so much more than someone that started Netflix. He is an entrepreneur extraordinaire. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you share this with people, Marc, but as someone who is a human behavior expert with a doctorate in clinical psychology, who absolutely did study psychoanalysis, I found out that Marc's paternal great grand uncle is none other than Sigmund Freud. So to say you're a thought leader is an understatement. Is that true?
That is absolutely true. He was kind of a family
Did you know
icon.
No, you didn't know. He was dead, right? Yeah, you're not that old.
No, I'm not that old, and he didn't live that long. And, certainly he lived on in our family's memory. I mean, there was books of him on all the shelves. I still have a signed photo of his down below me in the near the bedroom. So in fact, we didn't talk with some. Let's see what we have back here.
What do you have back there? There you have it. I see the family resemblance. Keep it there. I see the family resemblance, Marc.
Yeah. So, it's funny, certainly you can relate to the Sigmund Freud aspect of it. My other great uncle, not my great granduncle, my other great uncle was a guy named Edward Bernays, who in some ways was perhaps, I won't say influential, but more coincidentally aligned with what my career ended up becoming.
Well, I think what you're saying is you were playing more in his sandbox, in his space, as opposed to Freud's. But truly, when you think about it, there absolutely is a connection. And I believe this, Marc, that, we all now speak about the unconscious. No, but that didn't exist before Freud, right? Like, we just say it automatically now, right? Dreams, all that kind of stuff. Even though a lot of what Freud said we know really isn't true, but that's okay. He revolutionized the way we think about the mind, right? You did the same thing. So you did in your sphere. You revolutionized the way people, it's probably so much more. So forgive me if I don't say it the right way. You revolutionized the way people consume information for entertainment and education. Fair?
Yeah, I would have shortened it to consume content, but I think
That's why you get the big bucks.
I'm practiced. Yeah, it's true, because Freud, you're right. He really helps us understand why we think what we think. And the reason I threw Edward Bernays in there is he kind of realized it's possible to change how people think in a way that they don't necessarily recognize as being changed. And the combination of those two, for someone who spent their entire life as really fundamentally a marketing person, it's almost, you're right, it's almost too coincidental for there not to be something, some DNA connection there.
Well, why don't you share with us your entrepreneurial journey? And I brought up your family. I was doing research on you, and I'm like, this guy's amazing. and I do believe that, so our past doesn't dictate our future, but it absolutely influences it, right? So you have a family of thought leaders, obviously brainiacs, right? Originally, you're from the East Coast, right? You're right up the street from Chappaqua, right? Is that true?
That's Chappaqua, absolutely true. East Coast boy.
Yeah, because I saw you went to Hamilton. I'm like, whoa. Nobody from the West Coast. Well, very few people from the West Coast make it over to Hamilton. So,
and I still drink coffee.
Coffee,
so
coffee.
Yeah.
Drink coffee. Okay. So tell us about how you became an entrepreneur, because you went to Hamilton. You majored in geology, rocks. What?
Yep. And I was a bad student too. I was like a 2.7
Oh, I don't believe
GPA.
you for 1 second. I don't believe
it is absolutely true. Well, listen, it depends how you define that, but certainly on the classical definitions, I had a poor GPA. I failed one of my English literature classes. I had 2 Ds in economics, ironically enough.
Oh, wow.
But the real point of this whole youth thing is that these days, people sometimes, these days, entrepreneurship has been this glorified thing, that there's books and movies and TV shows, and there's Shark Tank. There's this myth of this entrepreneur. But when I was growing up, that really didn't exist. I mean,
right. You worked for IBM for 30 years, got a watch, and retired.
Yeah. I mean, there certainly were entrepreneurs, but they were generally thought of more popularly as people who couldn't hold a job. And so me getting into it, becoming an entrepreneur, was not, me growing up, I'm going to be like, Jeff Bezos, who was, my age or younger. It was that
but you have the same amount of hair.
Very good. That's true. I've got a better laugh than he does, though.
Yes, agreed.
But the point is, though, this is something that I was drawn to, that I was compelled to do, not something that I aspired to. I was just naturally, from the time I was really little, someone who, not to put a negative spin on it, but I saw the world as imperfect. I'd see problems, and rather than complaining or dismissing or ignoring them, I would go, there's got to be a better way to do that, to fix this, to try this. And obviously at the time, I didn't know what that was, but looking back, you can so much see those patterns. My first job, this is when I was 8 years old, I think, I was a door-to-door salesman selling seeds, like vegetables and flowers.
Oh my! And those little packets?
That's the one, for the American Seed Company. And I got to tell you, it verged on child exploitation, because I think the rules were that if you sold 7,000 packets, you earned a whistle or a cheap stopwatch. But I was into it. I would knock on doors. And of course, most of the time, nothing happens. And rather than slinking home to watch, Leave It to Beaver reruns, I would say, okay, I'm going to figure this out. And I'd try different approaches. I'd dress differently. I'd say different things. It was like I had this thing. I had to figure it out. And that never stopped. I mean, in middle school and high school, I was always the person who was starting little clubs and putting on little performances and doing magazines. And in college, I said my grades were bad. It's because I majored in geology, but I fundamentally majored in extracurricular stuff. And
socialization.
No, not social. I mean, I did that, of course, but that's not what I mean. I mean, I used the opportunity to start things. Like I ran the outing club. I launched a humor magazine. I put on a bunch of plays. I used the opportunity there to see these holes and just immediately want to fill them. And what was interesting is I was this is going to sound dumb, playing at entrepreneurship, I was doing the exact same stuff. I was convincing people to join me and help me and not paying them. I was going to a student government and convincing them to give me this small amount of money. I was figuring out how to promote this thing I was doing to the campus audience, all in an incredibly safe, supportive environment. If it didn't work, I still had a meal. I still had a roof over my head.
Right.
But I was learning these basic fundamentals and at the same time training myself that I found this thing incredibly compelling and emotionally and intellectually satisfying.
Okay, so Mark, I have to stop you because as you're speaking, I am getting caught up in your passion. Like it is clear that when you look back on it, like we tend to think entrepreneurship and success is born from pain. It sounds like to me, for you, it came from excitement and there's a problem. There has to be a way. You touched on something and I really want you to talk about it because I am sure you'll have such great advice for the listeners. You talked about failure and failure is such an integral aspect of entrepreneurship, right? It is not for the faint of heart being an entrepreneur because you said that, you founded so many successful entrepreneurial businesses and you said, and many that failed. But my sense is that you have a different mindset or perspective about failure. So talk to us about that, please.
Yeah, it's true. One of the biggest questions I get asked all the time is, tell us about your biggest failure or some significant failure.
Yeah,
and
that's not what I'm asking.
No, of course not. I'm
Okay.
using that to get to what you're asking, which is that I can't answer that question. And it's because I don't think about it that way because I fail so many times, thousands of times.
Join the club.
And what I've learned is that lo and behold, the world doesn't end. Okay, and listen, I'm not saying that being scared of failing is not a weird thing. It's very natural to not want to make a mistake. It's not natural to want to do something you're not sure how it's going to work. You don't want to look funny or be embarrassed. But you go, oh gosh, I'm not sure if this is going to work or not. And I'm not sure what's going to happen if it doesn't work, if it fails. And you try something and it fails and you're bracing for the roof to collapse and people to laugh. But none of that stuff happens. Instead,
so it doesn't paralyze you.
Not at all. There's no consequence whatsoever. And once you learn that, it is so unbelievably freeing. And that's not something you learn, in my opinion, academically, where you go, don't be scared. No, the only way you train yourself not to be scared is to do it enough times where you realize this is not really scary, that doing things you don't know what the outcome is going to be can be incredibly exciting once you realize there's no consequence for getting it wrong. And the fundamental tenet of entrepreneurship is just being willing to try things that have not been done before and that you don't know in advance if they're going to work or not.
It's almost a definition of entrepreneur. So exactly. I think it's John Maxwell, the leadership guru, that says sometimes you win and sometimes you learn.
It's like people, I don't know if you speak other languages.
Yes, I do. I speak Brooklynese.
Yeah.
From New York.
That's a dialect.
I am actually trying to learn Spanish because I am embarrassed that I don't know. And I took French and Latin in high school. But, the classic check the box kind of thing. So I'm on Duolingo. I think I'm on a 182-day streak, but who's counting?
Congratulations.
Trust me. Thank you. But it's a challenge. I'm trying to learn.
It's one of those, of course, the French and Latin is like them. I'm sure your parents went, it'll be very good for your English. You go, yeah, that's really Latin.
Well, back then, if you were going to college and if you were smart,
yeah,
that's what you took,
anyway,
right?
Where I was going with this is that
back to
my claim to fame is I happen to suck in 6 languages.
What does that mean?
Means I'm really bad in French and in Spanish and in Italian and in Russian and in Latin. And I guess I'm good at English. But anyway, what I've learned about learning languages is something which goes exactly to this fear of failure thing, is that the way you learn a language, and pardon me for the Duolingo is okay for this, is not by learning vocabulary. It's not by learning the rules of grammar.
Right.
It is by having the courage to walk into a coffee shop when you happen to be in Mexico and walking up to the counter and opening your mouth and being a grown-ass person like you and I are, and having something come out that sounds like you're 5 years old.
Right.
That takes courage, but that's the only way you learn a language. And entrepreneurship is identical. In fact, doing anything new is like that. You have to have the courage to do something you're not good at and master those skills and learn how it goes. You don't learn golf by watching videos and reading books on golf. You can do that, but you got to go out and hit balls. And doing anything challenging is going to be like that, including entrepreneurship.
So I'm so glad you talked about that, because there was something I was just reading recently, or it was an interview about the courage that if you fail, the people that will criticize you is not the man in the arena fighting, but it's the person in the stands that never took a chance. You're smiling, what?
No, that's a famous quote. I'm trying to remember.
Something like that, right?
Absolutely. It might even be Winston Churchill, I think.
Yeah, or Seneca, somebody like that.
Between ththose two, there are most of the quotes out there, that's what I think.
Right? And Marcus Aurelius, right? Marcus
Yes,
Aurelius.
that's it, right.
But so it takes courage. But how did you overcome failure after failure after failure? Because you are only human. And after a while, it's like, can I get up one more time?
Okay. So first of all, there's two different types of failures here, which we're talking about. And listen, I get really disappointed too when something I've really set my mind on, I'm sure is going to work, and we've worked really hard at, doesn't work. Mm-hmm. Yes, you get knocked down unless you're really disappointed, and you can't help but sulk and want to go into a dark area and curl up. But probably the biggest trick I've learned for avoiding that is, and this sounds a little trite, I guess, is I've trained myself to never fall in love with my ideas. And instead, I try and fall in love with the problem. Because it's ideas that don't work. Those, I have this great idea. And then your tendency is to nurture this little baby. And oh my gosh, imagine when it's going to be a valedictorian or a Heisman Trophy winner. And I, just as likely to do crack behind the 7-Eleven or something like that. But the problem will never abandon you. The problem gets richer and more nuanced the more you learn about it. So the key to avoiding disappointment is, if I go, this idea is everything, and I'm putting all my hopes in this idea, I'm going to be crushed when it doesn't work.
So let me ask you a question.
If I go, just one little thing to collide with this problem I'm trying to solve, then it doesn't work. Oh my gosh, but I've learned something. At the very least, I've learned what doesn't work. But usually I also gain some insight into who the consumer is, or what the problem really is, or what approach might. And that is almost more exciting than the disappointment that the thing didn't work. And that's what makes you get up every morning and go, oh my God, that yesterday's thing didn't work. I cannot wait to get to the office and try these next 2 or 3 things.
So it becomes it's a challenge, not an obstacle. Right?
There's no question about it.
What about the belief that a lot of entrepreneurs you hear talk about, where any problem can be solved if you ask the right question?
I don't know. I've never thought about it that way. I'm trying to think to myself, do I believe that's
Here we are, breaking news. I wanted to ask you something nobody else asked you.
It sounds, so pardon me, it's a little pop psychology here.
Well, of course. Yeah.
I'm not sure how it's actionable in terms of, what does that mean? How
to, so you have a problem. So what I'm suggesting is, was thinking of, all right, this is the problem. So it's almost like a YouTube, how do I look at? I
agree with that.
What hasn't been tried?
There's almost no problems. I agree. There's no problem you can't solve if you have enough time and enough resources, because there's always different things that you can try. And there's nothing, in my belief, that's truly intractable. And you look at all the amazing advancements, they did not come because something fundamentally shifted in the world. They shifted because somebody had a crazy idea that no one else had thought could possibly work. And then they had the guts to actually try it. And whoa, it did work. And then it opens up this entirely new avenue of exploration. It's since we're pulling out classics, it's the 4-minute mile, which everybody goes is impossible until Bannister ran one. And then within the next, 6 to 8 months, 20 more people ran it.
So I always say nothing's possible. It's impossible until somebody figures it out, right? And I end up talking about Elon Musk. I'm not a stargazer or any of that, but what I love about Elon Musk is that he defies the odds, and he just looks at everything as it's a challenge, and he'll figure it out and he'll find a way. And there's so much work behind that, right? All right. So you actually wrote a phenomenal book that I love the title to. Do you want to talk more about Netflix? I figure everybody and their mother asks you about Netflix. Like, you've moved on.
Well, I talk about Netflix a lot because I think a lot of interesting lessons, and because people know it. I mean, like you're about to bring up, I did write a book about the experiences starting and growing Netflix.
That will never work. That will never
work. Exactly.
And you know what? I loved that when I saw that and read that, because as a consultant, I am always told when I present something to do, which, by the way, I don't think is genius, but they're just not doing it. Look, that will never work here. Like, that's the only word that will never work here. And to me, I tell them from the get-go, that is the kiss of death. As soon as you say that won't work here, that means that you will not innovate and you will go the way of Kodak. What are you looking for?
I'm writing that down.
What?
Because
what did I say?
It's awesome. That's going to be the sequel to That Will Never Work.
Oh, that will never work.
That will never work here.
Here, right? Because we're special. Because we're right. It's the same concept. I am sure that is behind so much of your genius. So talk a little bit more about that. How that applied to Netflix. How that applied to your life. What you're up to now, going forward. Because That Will Never Work is to me, that means game on.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's meant to be. Because, listen, That Will Never Work is in some ways my motto, in a sense. I mean, the book is called That Will Never Work. I have a podcast, which is also called That Will Never Work. And it's because that's what every single person told me when I pitched them the idea for Netflix. What the investors said, it's what the early employees all said, my friends said, it's what my wife, God bless her, said. But it's fine, because everybody who has ideas hears that. Right. You're all excited, and that's what they say. That'll never work. But what you realize now is that the second most favorite phrase of mine is nobody knows anything. No one, it's impossible to know in advance if an idea is a good one or a bad one. So anyone who tells you that'll never work, they don't know. The only way I'm going to find out is by trying it, by testing something or building something or making something or selling something. And so That Will Never Work is kind of my reminder. Yeah, okay. I expect that. I'm on
to something. I'm on to something.
My wife and I joke, it's become like this negative indicator that if she doesn't like an idea, we both go, aha, this is a good one. But it is true. The worst thing is if you let other people tell you something won't work. I'm not saying don't listen to why they think it won't work. Listen, absorb. Do due diligence. Yeah, you don't want to fall in the same holes someone else has fallen in, but never take that at face value as a reason not to do something. That Will Never Work is our encouraging rallying cry for entrepreneurs that, I'll figure it out.
So my sense is that when people say that will never work, or when I hear that will never work here, I will say, well, tell me why, right? And then you can hear their thought behind that. You can also hear their self-limitations, which, by the way, you don't have to make yours to be your self-limitations, right? And then do you find the pearls of wisdom that will help you do?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Can you give us an example of that?
one of the personality traits that I think is for example, the podcast is basically where I'm mentoring people. These are not me just talking with successful entrepreneurs. It's sessions that I would do with an early stage entrepreneur, trying to coach them through a business problem.
How generous of you. That's awesome. That is awesome.
Well, the thing is, there's so much entrepreneurial advice which gets boiled down to little Instagram worthy nuggets of wisdom.
Nonsense.
And
Nonsense.
that's exactly the attitude, which is, yes, correct, but that isn't really helpful. What you need is the context. How does it apply to me? Wait, how do I do that? And so doing these live sessions is me actually walking through a concept with someone. But how do you take something which we all know is the case, but how do you really work in practice? But the thing is, by working with I forgot where we're going with this. We were talking about
just go. You're talking about mentoring. That will never work. This is great.
So the thing is, when you realize who do you want to work with, and I'm talking about mentoring when I do something where I'm mentoring someone for multiple weeks, months, years, I'm looking for two very specific traits, and they are in some ways contradictory traits, because I'm looking for self-confidence. Because when everyone's telling you that will never work over and over and over again, when you're, as we talked about before, bumping into problem after problem after problem, if you don't have this self-confidence that says, eventually I'm going to figure it out, you're going to give up. So you've got to believe in yourself. You've got to have that optimism. But you've got to also temper it with this other trait, which is this willingness to listen and to really try and understand a different point of view. And if you can, integrate that into your thinking, because otherwise you're going to blindly plunge ahead. And as I said before, you're going to fall in the exact same holes a lot of people have fallen in before you. So you need to have this sense of self-confidence, but this openness to other ways of thinking.
So Mark, I have to ask you a question.
Adam Grant, who's one of my faves, I think he calls it, arguing like you're right, but listening like you're wrong.
Like you're wrong. Right. Exactly. I do want to ask you a question. I just found something you said interesting. Why would you position this as two contradictory personality traits? Because to me, self-confidence comes from the ability to listen and be an active listener. So why I don't,
in my experience, I don't see those two traits overlapping that often. I can assure you. Yeah, a lot of people, especially in Silicon Valley, self-confidence.
Oh, well, wait a minute. That's a whole new world.
Yeah, I know everything. How dare you tell me this is not the way it is? Of course, what do you know? And they just go ahead with whatever they believe and aren't willing to really listen. I'm not saying
they say that to you. They'll say to you, "What do you know?"
No, because I try and listen about 4 to 1 as much as I speak. I'm making an exception for you today, but usually I go, I know what I know. I don't know what they know, and my speaking is largely trying to clarify, is my understanding correct, rather than trying to convince someone of something. I mean, obviously it's contextual, but generally that's what being open, having a strong internal sense of what you think is right, but still being open.
Well, I'm glad you're speaking, because people want your wisdom. But again, you might be mad at me, but what you're describing in Silicon Valley, and we have that on Wall Street here, right? All the geniuses.
Yep.
I don't, and maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but I don't consider that self-confidence. I consider that arrogance.
Well, I'll put it this way. We'll do it this way. It's arrogance when it's not coupled with openness to other ways of thinking. It's self-confidence when it is. How about that?
There we go. I love that. I love that, because I love when people are self-confident, right? And I do feel that is matched with, this is a huge assumption, but maybe some humility that I don't know everything. So tell me, like when someone says that will never work, I believe that will never work, but please tell me how you think it will.
Right.
Then you start brainstorming, right? So when people must be lining up around the block, I don't know, that might be an East Coast term. You guys might not use it on the West Coast, to be mentored by you. So obviously you can select whom you want. So you have the two personality traits, the self-confidence and somebody willing to listen. And then what else are you looking for?
The other big one, in fact, probably even the most dominant thing, is I'm looking for someone I like. I'm going to be spending a lot of time with this person. I'm going to be helping them usually with very difficult things that are emotionally complex and challenging and upsetting potentially. If I don't enjoy spending time with this person, it becomes a chore rather than something I would look forward to. My litmus test is if the phone buzzes next to my bedside at 11 o'clock p.m. and I look at who on the caller ID and I wince, that is a bad sign. And life is too short. You've got to enjoy the people that you spend time with.
Awesome. Now, when you started Netflix, you had a co-founder?
Oh, well, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
It was actually even a probably better entrepreneur than I am, which is Reed Hastings, who is the current co-CEO and chairman at Netflix.
Okay.
Yeah, but
go ahead.
No, please, after you.
No, I wanted to know about, because I work so much with the relationship aspect of business, especially with co-founders and partners. So there must have been so many things that you and Reed had to work through during your time there. So how did you navigate that? Now, I do understand Freud is in your family, but we got to get more up to date here. So all of that relationship stuff, being aligned, core values, I don't know, is it fair to say two relatively strong egos in the room? How'd you navigate that?
So when I, besides having some common interests, and I don't mean golf or something like that, I mean, both of us really enjoyed the metrics aspect of business. Both of us really liked risk-taking. I mean, those are reasonably common. But the thing that immediately drew Reed and I to each other when we very first met was both of us shared a trait which is perhaps less common, which is what we've come to call radical honesty. This feeling that life is way too short to mince words or shade the truth or try and avoid hurting someone's feelings, that it's so much more efficient, powerful, and fulfilling to be able to say exactly what you think, and trust that the other person not only can handle that, but would appreciate that. And Reed and I had that relationship from day one. And in fact, I think, since we could talk about culture later, but culture springs from how the founders behave. And that culture of radical honesty has permeated Netflix ever since, and I think is one of its big competitive advantages. But Reed and I were always able to have it out if we needed to. If we disagreed, we would both argue vociferously for what we thought was the right way to go. But as soon as we turned the corner and realized that one of us was right or the other was right, or there actually was a combination of the two, it was almost like immediately you forgot whose idea it originally was. It didn't make a difference. It didn't even occur to you. It was so self-evidently right, this was the way to go. And then you fall in behind that. And it just was this incredibly effective way to work together. At times, at the early on beginning, there'd be these meetings we'd have, and Reed and I would be, I'm using the term going at it as if it's mean or heated. It's not. It's both of us enthusiastically trying to convince the other one of a certain way of going. And you could almost look up and you'd see people around the table almost with this look of their, like, why is mom and dad fighting?
Yeah.
It was a way that Reed and I found we could get to these fundamental truths, these fundamental best practice to do for the business.
Okay, you said so much there. Oh my gosh. From the conflict resolution with business partners, right? Which comes up all the time in my work. So what many business partners do is they make the kiss of death mistake. They avoid the problem. So you avoid it, right? So you laugh, but a lot of people do that. And then they become emotionally attached to their position. And you also said something that is brilliant, where they look as a foundation. I will tell people, don't worry about the problem right away. Don't look at the conflict. Look for the common ground. What's the common denominator? What do you agree on? And then fight it to the death, maybe on how to operationalize it or get to it. But you do know everybody doesn't have the thick skin that you and Reed have and had. So would you tailor that brutal honesty, difficult conversation style with other people in the company?
No, it was that
Well,
radical honesty is radical honesty is radical honesty. You should never, ever say something about someone behind their back that you wouldn't say to their face. You should never have information that we can't trust that person to know. It's a terrible way. Forget tell me how to run a business. It is not the way you attract and retain phenomenal people.
Okay, I misunderstood. I misspoke. What I meant was, would you tailor the difficult? Would you speak differently to people? Everybody, maybe.
Of course.
Okay, that's that, because you said people are there like, whoa.
No, they're just a little surprised as they get used to this manner. I mean, listen, you grew up in Brooklyn, is that right?
There you go, the center of the universe.
Yeah, my mom grew up in Flatbush, so I kind of knew that whole
there you go
part of the world. And I grew up similarly.
We're tough. You come from tough skin.
Dinner table was just short of food flying back and forth.
Yes, food fight.
But it's not because you're mad. It's because you have these opinions and everyone's used to it and they're trying to get a word in edgewise, and it's a way to do it. But you recognize sometimes you go to visit your friend who's your college roommate whose parents from Kansas, and they don't quite behave the same way. And especially in a Silicon Valley startup where you have two fundamentally very different personality types, which you have the business marketing side and you have the engineering analytical side, and you cannot treat there. It's Mars and Venus. And one of the things you learn if you work out here long enough is you have to, that I can go to Reed or anybody in that side of the business and say, oh my God, here's what you see to do. And then they'll fight right back at me. An engineer, he or she won't. They'll absorb and they'll nod. And nodding doesn't mean I agree. Nodding means I understand what you're saying. And now I need to go back and process and calculate and do scenarios and algorithms. And then 2 days later, I could mistakenly walk away going, oh, good. They're convinced. They're on board. And then 2 days later, I've been thinking about it. It's a terrible idea. And here's exactly why. Yes, right. Honesty is honesty, but certainly the manner in which you deliver and deliberate is going to be different.
Right. And I always say you can pretty much say anything to anybody. It's all in how you say it. Like I like to call my style the thundering velvet hand. Like I am a straight shooter. Anybody that works with me will tell you, Dr. Patty, no BS, she tells it as it is. But if you couch it from a place of empathy and caring, like to have that honesty means you care enough to tell them the truth. Otherwise, you're like, I really don't care. I'm not about to have that conversation with you.
So can I tell you a great Reed Marc honesty conversation story?
Love it, please.
So, and this one is in the book too, and perhaps a little bit more detail, but there was a point, when we started Netflix, Reed wasn't there. He was my chairman, but he was going to school still, or going back to school.
How young were you guys at the time?
I was 38. Reed was 37.
Okay, not quite babies.
No, not by any means. Well, by now I'd give anything to be 38 or 37.
Right? Me too. Isn't everything relative, Mark? Everything's relative, right?
Exactly right. But I was running the company, and Reed was the chairman of the board. He'd stop in on his way home from school, and we'd chat about the business sometimes. And this was maybe not long in, and Reed stopped by later in the evening, and poked his head in and said, "We got to talk," which is not usually a good omen.
Yeah.
And basically, he came in to tell me he was concerned about my leadership.
Ooh,
Uh, and saying, and he actually very helpfully had prepared a PowerPoint slideshow
wait, he
of
did?
all. Yes, he's an engineer at heart, so he had to organize his thoughts. But I go, Reed, I am not going to sit here and let you pitch me on how I suck. But he was okay, closes the laptop, and had this conversation. And his basic message was, I'm concerned about your leadership. He goes, we're doing great now, but I see signs of problems. And if there's problems at this scale, they're going to be more significant when we grow. Our execution is going to have to be flawless. And he kind of outlined some of the things he'd seen. And at the moment, I thought he was going to fire me or something, because he was the chairman of the board. He had more stock than I did, because he had invested money in the company too. And what I realized as we were talking is he wasn't planning on firing me. He was proposing that he join the company full time and we run the company together. And it was a really difficult moment, because one of the things you have as an entrepreneur is you have this dream of, I'm going to start and run this big successful company. But then there comes this point where you recognize, well, maybe this is actually two separate dreams. There's the dream of me starting and running, and there's the dream of the big successful company. And what if those dreams aren't the same? And worse, what if the dream of the big successful company isn't just my dream anymore? It's the dream of my employees. It's the dream of my investors, and maybe it's the dream of my customers. And so when Reed said that he thought I wasn't the right person to solely run the company, it was really, really hard. But what made it work was the trust, was the honesty, that I did not for a minute think that Reed had an ulterior motive. I didn't think he was angling for something. I don't think he was saying that if he really felt these things and I really respected him, which I did and do, then I had to take his comments really, really seriously. And I went home. My wife and I split a bottle of wine, sitting out on the porch for hours, talking about what should I do? How should I think about this? And then fundamentally decided he's right. It's hard to argue that the company wouldn't be stronger with both of us running it together. And I decided that I would do that. He would come in, we would split it. We'd be co-CEOs. He would, run the engineering and the finance, the operations. I'd run the marketing and the website and the customer service. And in some ways, looking back, probably the best decision I ever made at Netflix, because it kind of marked the beginning of the renaissance at Netflix. Some of the most important things that ever happened in those next 5 years we ran the company together. But the point is that couldn't have happened, or at least I don't think it could have happened, if I had not trusted Reed completely and recognized that he was speaking completely truthfully to me. And that I could not be an egotist about it.
Okay, so I'm just wondering though, the way he presented it to you, it sounds to me like, did you really have a choice? It sounds like sort of kind of was
absolutely, well, implicitly and explicitly.
You did.
First of all, I knew.
You could have said no, and could have stayed running the company, or you would have been gone and he was coming in to run the company.
No, I don't know what the outcome would have been if I had said no, but I know he would never have forced it on me. We might have said, let's sell the company. He might have said, let's do something differently. But Reed would never have forced something like, if he was, he would have told me right the first thing out of his mouth.
So there's no guessing. There's no guesswork.
Correct. I mean, it was laid out honestly and emotionally, and I could tell, this is going to sound stupid, but with love rather than with anger or complaint.
Doesn't sound stupid at all. Doesn't sound stupid at all.
He genuinely recognized how difficult this would be for him to say to me, and how difficult it would be for me to hear, and had the honesty and the courage to say it anyway. And
I wish people.
I have huge respect for him for that.
I really wish more people around the world could have those conversations. brutal honesty, right? Coming from an authentic, genuine place, agree to disagree respectfully, and then find a way. Just find a way.
And it's worked out remarkably well. I mean, Reed is still running the company, and he is having the time of his life. Maybe, moments here and there going, what did I get myself into? But genuinely playing this global chess game, which is like what he totally lives for. I have not worked there for 15 some odd years. I'm getting a chance to every day come in and spend my day doing the thing that I love, which is working with early stage companies. I'm getting a chance to spend time with my family, getting a chance of time to go backpacking and mountain biking and trail running and surfing and the things that make me whole. This couldn't have been and Netflix, look at it. It's a verb. Doesn't
right?
get much better than that.
That's when you know you've made it, right? It's a verb, right? Google, Netflix. Actually, you just mentioned something. You said that you equated entrepreneurial funding as an investor. You compared that to being a mountain guide. So talk a little bit about that. You just touched.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's compared. I've often said that one of the best leadership educations I ever had was my time in the mountains. And it's because it's funny, you recognize a similarity. There's a part of my youth, my late teens, early 20s, where I was a guide. I basically taught outdoor leadership for a school called the National Outdoor Leadership School, Knowles. And we basically took groups of people of all ages, adults, kids, on these long expeditions into the mountains to teach leadership. And what I realized is that this is so similar to what I do now, because back then the methodology is they'd say, okay, you're a leader of the day. Here's where you're going to be going. Here's your group of 4 or 5 people. This is to a person who might be 15 years old, and go, we'll see you at camp tonight. And this person now has to make decisions. They have to decide, are we going to go the way around, the easy way in the valley, which is longer? Or are we going to go up and over the pass, shorter, but climbing? Are we going to try and cross the river? When are we going to stop for lunch? How long are our breaks going to be? What happens when someone says, I'm getting a blister? Do I say, tough it out or keep going? If I get lost, what do I do? What do I say? How do I communicate to my group? All this stuff. And this is someone who's 15 years old, who's being given real responsibility with real consequences, where they find out just 8 to 10 hours later how they did. And I did that when I was 14, and I did that when I was 15.
How'd you get involved in that?
Well, my mom packed me off to Wyoming when I was 14 years old. And I thought, hey, I'm just going to summer camp. And lo and behold, there I am being dropped off at a trailhead, and the truck driver goes, we'll see you in a month. And off I go. And the first day you walk in with the main leaders, who are, the paid leaders. Second day, it's okay, Randolph, you're leader of the day. And you deer in the headlights. And you learn how to, you better assess the strength of your group. Otherwise, you get in problems. You learn how to communicate with clarity and confidence. Here's where we're going, even if you're not quite so clear or confident yourself. You learn to think about, when do I stop? How long are my breaks? You learn all this stuff when you're 14, and then you make a lot of mistakes and have someone who comes in afterwards and goes, do you see what you did? What happened when you said this? What happened when you didn't say this? Immediate consequences. And these days, no one who's 14 and 15 gets to make real decisions with real consequences at that age, where they learn the results of their actions so quickly thereafter. And little by little, more and more responsibility. And then pretty soon I'm one of the paid instructors, and then I'm leading the entire course. And so by the time I got to being in a position where I was doing this for money, like in an entrepreneurial setting, it wasn't the first time. I know how to communicate with clarity and confidence where we're going, even if I'm not quite so sure where we're going. I know how to invest strengths and weakness of my group. I know how to talk to the person who's the leader, who's the strong one, and say, let's slow down so we can all be together. And I know how to talk to the person who's the weaker person and say, no, we're going to do this together, and don't worry about it. Let's take some of your weight. We're all going to make this as a group. I mean, you learn these things that are internalized. again, I think we talked at the very beginning, the best way to do this is to practice, to open your mouth in the coffee shop and be embarrassed and learn how to do it better. And leadership is no different. And I learned so much about that in the mountains.
So many thoughts I have as you were speaking. One is, obviously your mother is from Brooklyn because they're very smart women, right? So she knew. So kudos to, my joke is, if you shake somebody's family tree hard enough, somebody from Brooklyn will fall out. And everything that you talked about, I'm literally thinking of, this is how you make special forces, right? On some level, I think the Boy Scouts was supposed to teach that, but seriously, being a team and how to speak and motivate. But what keeps screaming at me as you're speaking is emotional intelligence.
In other words, this ability to recognize, be empathetic to how people are going to respond to the way that you're communicating with them or with the situation you've put them in, and then be able to respond appropriately
to each person, because what motivates one person is different than another, right? So some people you have to, is it the carrot or the stick? And you need to know as a leader, which is for, you have 3 children, right, Mark?
I do.
So what worked for one doesn't work for the other.
Absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, I sometimes say that one of my skills that ended up being hugely valuable in the e-commerce world, which is what Netflix really was something I used to call remote empathy, which is being able to understand how someone's going to feel and respond when I can't see them. In other words, I'm going to communicate, I'm going to price something a certain way. I'm going to write a letter a certain way. I'm going to start a paragraph a certain way. How is someone who sees that going to respond? And training direct empathy is still hard, but easier. I say something and I see you open your eyes, or I see you nod, or I see you turn your head to this. Okay, I'm getting all kinds of clues that you're either happy or upset or curious, or it's
disengaged.
Really hard. If I said, get behind that door, I'm just going to say it, and I'm going to try and imagine how you're taking it. It's a little bit trickier.
So I keep thinking as you're saying that, right? And that's your brilliance, where the marketing, email marketing campaigns and copywriting and all of which, quite frankly, I have to hire people to do because it's not my wheelhouse at all. So I need you. But does AI play a role in this? Are we moving into AI with this kind of stuff?
I hope not.
No, I'm just showing my ignorance.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm not an expert either. I mean, I certainly probably know more than most people about it, but I don't geek out on it. It doesn't interest me that much. I'm still very old school. I'm the kind of person who goes back and rereads old emails I sent and go, oh man, that was good. I just love that old-fashioned method of communicating. AI will help. It can certainly help create shortcuts. In other words, but ultimately, I don't believe it's yet ready to replace the unbelievable ability we all have to have emotional intelligence, to be able to read these thousands of subliminal cues. And I think we lose something as a people if we ever lose that.
Well, I think I agree. And I think a lot of, and I wonder how, as an entrepreneur, you where you are at this stage in your career, I feel like, I don't want to sound like, grandmother time here, but everything has an upside and a downside to it, right? And yep. I have seen in my work and just my life that people do not know how to communicate and how to connect. Right, like you said earlier about when you do something and there's consequences, and I think a lot of what's going on in the world, I really do, I might get in trouble, is epic parenting failure. Quite frankly, our generation, I don't know, like, not only are there no consequences, we didn't even allow, we picked the best, we insisted on the best teacher, and if it's an 89, you got to give the kid an A. So where are we with that today, and how is that influencing your work?
It's this thing which has caused the problem. Those of you who are just listening, I'm holding up my cell phone.
Yeah, we won't know he's born with this glued to the hip. for anybody,
Yeah.
what, younger than 35?
It's I mean, now now this is the true get off my lawn part of the podcast. But it's like, come on, get your head out of that stupid thing for a while. I mean, one of the beautiful things about these Knowles courses that I was talking about is they're device free. I mean, you get out and two things. One is they're device free. And second, within about 3 or 4 days, everyone looks and smells the same. So you're not hiding behind hairstyles and makeup and clothing and swagger. And so it's a chance to really connect as people. And I wish we had more opportunity. That's one of the most, I'm an environmental advocate. I love being outside. I love hiking, climbing, skiing, backcountry skiing, anything that gets me
Surfing. You're a
out in the
surfer,
woods.
right?
What's that?
You're a surfer,
surfing,
right?
anything. Because it forces you to live in the moment. It forces you to disconnect. It forces you to spend time relating with people as people. There's just so much power to it. So, you know what? I'm not sure what you and I can do. And every generation has said, oh my God, this rock and roll, it's going to be, and you and I did okay. And so who knows, kids will adapt, but boy, I think that they're missing something.
You are the eternal optimist. You always come back to, we'll find a way. There was a letter that was written, and it talks about this younger generation. They're rude, they're this, they have no work ethic. It was written by like Benjamin Franklin back in the 1700s. So you're right. We will adapt, although I do feel that we are in somewhat of a paradigm shift in society, especially on the heels of COVID. Right. And honestly, I think there was a lot of people that died, and that's a horrible thing. But I do feel that there was a lot of shakeout from COVID. And honestly, Mark, as a mother of 4 children, working women have been begging since they went into the workforce to be able to work from home. Right. Yep. So there's a lot of positive to be said, and you can create a culture, but you can't use it with the old paradigm shift, right? So do we have time? You were going to talk a little bit about culture?
Sure, for a few minutes. I mean, I think
Sure.
Culture is certainly in a business context, the most important thing. It's more important than almost anything else you do is have this effective culture. But in a nutshell, it's not, I always say culture is not aspirational, it's observational. Mm-hmm. It's not something that you go into a conference room and design what you want your culture to look like, or put together a PowerPoint of here's what we think, and then put it on nice little posters and put them in the break room or wear them on little pin. Culture is how you act. Mm-hmm. It's how the founders act. It's how they treat each other. It's how they treat their employees. It's how they treat their customers. And as parents, you learn firsthand what you say. It counts way, way less than what you do.
Right.
You can talk your blue in the face we're all about trust and honesty. And as soon as your kids see that you're not being honest, they go, okay, I know what's really, really important. And I think that's the same thing with company culture. It's got to mirror who you are, and you've got to be consistent. You need to call each other on your stuff, that if you're not being true to the things you are, how many companies go, we have a no asshole rule, until the person is a super high performing asshole who we can't afford to let go of. And then all of a sudden there's a carve out. Yep. No, you're tormenting me by saying, let's talk about culture in the last few minutes here, because I can go on forever about this. But culture is also it's like erosion, which is 99% of erosion takes place in 1% of the time. Remember, I'm a geology major. And culture is like that. Most of this imprinting takes place in very, very conspicuous incidents, which is generally who you hire, who you fire, and who you reward. And as a coach, people will have someone who's not working out at the company, and the person will leave, and then they'll turn to their department and go, Emily is leaving to spend more time with her family, or she's leaving to pursue other opportunities. And you go, oh my gosh, you just missed an unbelievable learning opportunity to say what your culture is about and that you mean it. Emily's not here because one of our most important things is that we do bend over backwards to do what's right for the customer. And she consistently on these various occasions was going the opposite. I mean, I'm making something up, but you get
she
the idea.
she violated the cultural norms of the company.
And that's so, we feel so strongly about that we decided she's not the right person to be here. The other one, I do a lot of keynote speaking, and a lot of the times you'll get up there and the CEO gets up front and goes, no, today I'm so excited because, as you know, the theme for this year is think differently and reward risk-taking. And we're going to in a minute hear from Marc Randolph to talk about innovation risk-taking. But before we do that, I'd like to bring up our sales leaders for the year. And great, we're going to talk about innovation risk-taking, but we're going to reward the people who make the money for us.
Right.
As opposed to going, we're going to bring up some people who took some big risks here, and I'm going to send them on a 2-week trip to Hawaii, even though it didn't work. Because
that's what
I
always
really
say. It's permission to fail. Companies mean it when they'll promote the person where it didn't work. 1,000%.
And send the signals loudly that this is what they believe and what we stand for.
So how do you feel about, I feel as someone where trust is the key, the linchpin in all healthy relationships, right? And the sooner, when you have a violation of trust, the sooner that violation is addressed is indicative of the health of the organization and a positive culture. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely do. I mean, I think that the single biggest thing that rots an organization out from the inside is when you have that failure of trust. And it can go the opposite way. You can take a general standard of trust and begin taking it even further. I mean, like Netflix, I don't work there now, but for example, I don't know if you're familiar with what their travel policy is. There isn't one. What their expense policy is, there isn't one. What their vacation policy is,
yeah,
there isn't one. Because they trust people to make good judgments on their own. They trust people. Everyone knows what everyone else makes, because they encourage people to go out and apply for their jobs, because we want you to understand your true value in the marketplace. I mean, this radical honesty as radical transparency is not just something which is good to have. It is a competitive advantage. People don't join companies and stay there and like there because of the kombucha on tap and the nap pods and the fireman poles and all the other bullshit that companies seem to think is what you need to do. They fundamentally, people want to be treated like adults. They want to be trusted. They want to be given responsibility. They want to be given freedom. And the more you can do that, it's a superpower.
It's awesome. All right. So I know we're running a little late. So I have one more question, and then I want you to tell people how they can find out more about you. What is the last book you've reread?
Oh, it's corny. It's not, because what you're thinking perhaps is that Marc is very deliberate about what he reads and puts things in a bookshelf and constantly swaps the order. And as a result, but it's not, I'm much more an opportunist. I'm going, oh crap, if this book's finished, what's next? It's like watching TV.
Well, we don't watch TV, we watch Netflix, but go ahead.
I got onto a John McPhee jag. And
I don't know that author. Should I know?
John McPhee is an incredible nonfiction writer, essayist, really.
Okay.
But writes these incredibly interesting books because he embeds himself deeply. So the one I just finished reading is about transportation, where he basically talks about, cross-country trucking and about freight trains and about tugboats on the Mississippi and about transatlantic cargo ships. I mean, but he goes and spends months in these means of transportation. Anyway, that's what I reread most recently.
So you've read it more than once?
Oh, absolutely. I read it when it first came out, probably 25 years ago, and then got hooked because someone recommended one I hadn't read before, read it and go, oh my gosh, I love this guy's writing. And then went back and reread a whole bunch of other stuff that I'd read a long time ago. And of course, you read differently when you're older.
Wow. Well, right. You interpret it differently. I lied. I have another question. What is the one most important thing you've learned about life that everybody needs to know?
Wow, I got a bunch of them. Okay, the most important thing is that balance is the most important thing in the world.
In the world, defined as
think so.
what?
For people, for individuals. I'm not saying for world peace and that kind of stuff. I started, you said, I started 7 companies, and 2 of them have been huge, billion-dollar companies, and I've got 3 IPOs. I have all kinds of stuff that would be considered a traditional success. That is not what I'm proudest of, because I favor balance. And what I'm proudest of is that I managed to do all that and stayed married to the same woman for 35 plus years, my best friend, and had my 3 kids grow up knowing me and, best I can tell, liking me, and made sure I had time in my life to pursue the other things that made me whole, which is all my backcountry stuff, my skiing and my surfing and my kayaking and all those things. And that was really hard. Entrepreneurship is a very demanding mistress. And to make those other things work, I had to prioritize them. I had to say that's the most important thing is finding the 3 parts of the stool, and making sure I build a life that works for that. And
I love that. I love that.
Looking back, that's what I'm proud of. I'm incredibly lucky that I've been able to pull that off.
I love that. And it's what you said is, to strike that balance, you had to be intentional.
Oh, understatement. It has to be the most important thing you set out to do every day, every hour, every week, because otherwise there's always, when I was just about 30, I was working all the time, weekends, nights, holidays. And then I was living with the woman who's now my wife, and kind of dawned on me, maybe with a little bit of encouragement from her, the dawning part, that she was getting leftovers. And I realized that that's not the basis for sustainable relationship. More importantly, that doesn't work like this. I have to do something differently. And that she's never going to be complaining at the same level the business was calling out for my attention. That it was going to require me to back off and say, how do I plan a life? And I had a lot of things I did to make that happen that were not easy. But if there's one example, it's not, oh, Marc started Netflix, Marc started Looker, or Marc started this. That's not the example to take. The example to take is it is possible to have that kind of business success and have a solid relationship with your friends and your family and have time to pursue the things that make you whole and alive.
I love that.
It's possible.
I love that. I actually, with my work in business and business relationships, what's happened is I've seen so much working with founders and CEOs that I work with entrepreneurs in their intimate relationships because the challenges are so different. It's exactly what you said. It's a mistress. It's a mistress. So, Marc, please tell our listeners where they can find out more about you, how they can get your book, how they can listen to your podcast, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so the best place is that ground zero for Marc Randolph is my website, which is marcrandolph.com. It's Marc with a C, it's Randolph with a PH. But that's where you'll find links to buy the book, for the audio book. There's a new paperback edition with a new afterwards. It's where you'll find links to the podcast, my writing. And if you don't have the patience for a 360-page book or for 30-minute podcasts, you can digest it in nice, 200 and some odd character tweets. Or if you want, you can get me dancing on on TikTok, LinkedIn. It's all there. But it's all my attempt seriously to give back and really say, hopefully, some of the things I talk about will help other people have the same chance to see the fulfillment of being an entrepreneur that I've had.
Marc, thank you so much. This was so much fun, so enlightening. I literally could have you here for hours, but all good things come to an end. So again, thank you. And that concludes today's podcast episode of The Trust Doctor, Restoring Trust and Enriching Significant Relationships. And as promised, Marc did not disappoint, and he took us for a hell of a ride. So make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe to this podcast. And we'll see you next time. Be well.
Once again, we've concluded another great episode of The Trust Doctor with Dr. Patty Ann. Tune in next week for more insights and advice on how you can create, nurture, and sustain healthy relationships. To find out more about the podcast, visit drpattyann.com/podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, and share. Until next time.